All right. In this little screencast, should be a pretty short one. We're going to talk about when and how to start new paragraphs when I'm creating a story. It's something that's going to help our organization score and going to make sure that a reader who's reading our story can really follow it. One thing that is kind of challenging when you're writing a story is figuring out when those paragraphs should happen. Sometimes it feels like there's not rules to determine when you should start, and so what might happen sometimes is we just never start paragraphs, or we start paragraphs way too often. So we're going to talk about some of the kind of guidelines around that, and then I'll show you an example, and then you can take some time to look at your story and start paragraphs where they need to start. So the first thing that you need to focus on is when you have a new topic or a new person that you're talking about in your story. So you move from one topic to another topic, or you're describing one character and then you describe another character. You would have a new paragraph when you describe that new person. Next is a new speaker. We've talked about that with dialogue. So anytime we're changing to somebody from like description to dialogue, we would indent that. And if we're moving from the dialogue of one character to another character, we would also indent that on a new line. A new time is really important. So if I'm moving from telling a story about, oh, this happened this afternoon, and then I start, and say, well, that next morning, I would indent there because I'm changing from one time period to another time period, no matter how kind of insignificant that time period might seem. A new place, same thing. So I'm moving from part of the story that takes place in Hawaii to part of the story that takes place in California. Or I'm moving from part of the story that takes place in the kitchen to part of the story that takes place in my bedroom. It's a new place, new paragraph. And then the last one is if there's sort of a significant plot point, a significant change in the story, or you just want to create some dramatic effect in your story, you can do that by creating a new paragraph to kind of set that moment by itself and sort of create a significant moment for the reader. So let's take a look at that in practice. So here's the story of Goldilocks and the Three Bears, or at least the start of it. Let's get it so that we can see it. And I'll show you kind of, I'll think out loud as I'm reading through the story to show you where I would put paragraphs. So obviously I'm going to paragraph at the beginning of the story. I press tab to start that story. I read, it says, oftentimes people tell stories to share their culture. Sometimes people tell stories to entertain. But other times people tell stories to teach a valuable lesson. This is one of those stories. Once upon a time, there's a little girl named Goldilocks. Oh my gosh, that's a new topic, right? It's a new idea. So I'm going to press enter. This time it automatically tabbed for me, but if it didn't, you're going to want to make sure that you press the tab button to get that indented. So once upon a time, there was a little girl named Goldilocks who lived on the edge of a forest. She had beautiful golden hair and she loved to take long walks where she would explore the world around her looking for adventure. One day, oh, that's a moment in time. It's a shift in time. Should be a new paragraph. One day, Goldilocks decided to go a different way in the forest than she normally did. She walked for about 20 minutes and the forest started to get darker and darker. All of a sudden, she came upon a house in a clearing. Oh my gosh, all of a sudden. That could be a dramatic shift in the plot, right? So if I wanted to, I could put a new paragraph there. I could even set that sentence by itself if I wanted to for dramatic effect. Or since it's not a huge dramatic shift, I could also leave it like that. I think probably best practice would be to start a new paragraph at that point. All of a sudden, she came upon a house in a clearing. She knocked, and when no one answered, she walked right in. Inside the house, that's another shift in location, so that could be a new paragraph there. Inside the house, there were several rooms she could see from the entryway. A cozy-looking family room, a kitchen with a welcoming breakfast nook, and then off to the side, she saw a staircase leading up to the second floor, where she assumed some bedrooms might be. Her eyes, however, were focused on the kitchen. Now that, as a writer, I want that sentence to kind of stand alone by itself, so I'm going to make the choice to set that as a paragraph on its own, because I want it to kind of stand alone. I want my reader to think like, oh, this is an important point in the story. So I set it by itself, I indent that line, I indent the line afterwards just for dramatic effect. Okay, she walked into the kitchen and saw that on the breakfast table there were 3 bowls of porridge. Goldilocks was hungry. She tasted the porridge from the first bowl. This porridge is too hot. Oh my gosh, that's a new speaker. There you go. New line, indented. She exclaimed. She put her spoon down. So at the end of the day, these are the places where you want new paragraphs. You want it anytime you have a new topic, anytime you have a new speaker, a new time, a new place, or a new plot point. Those are going to be our reasons for starting new paragraphs. So you'll notice in my story, I have some paragraphs that feel very short. I have some that are just one line long, some that are a little bit longer. That's kind of how a story should look. So when you're all done, you should have indented in exactly the right places. And that way you will do well on the organization section of the rubric.